So I'm pretty sure most of you have experienced this. At some point in your lives, at some time, you grasped onto this destination called space. And with thanks to outreach programs like NASA, they're there to challenge and to accept kids' desires to go into space. And the thought process is fairly simple. It goes a little like this. I like space. I want to go to space. Astronauts go to space. I want to be an astronaut. And so my experience had a bit of a twist to that version. It actually started on January 29th, 1986. It's the day after the shuttle explosion, Challenger explosion. And the night before on the news, there was a bombardment of video and images on TV showing the two SRBs going off each way, and that iconic image. And so it was kind of burned into my brain as it might have been in yours. And so the next day I'm getting ready for school, and that was the first day the newspapers were out with a commentary and a front page on it. And there was again the image of the Challenger explosion. So it was already, maybe I was already desensitized to it, but I flipped over the newspaper and something caught my eye. It was the images of the 7 astronauts and a small bio underneath them. So I started reading those, and I was reading about their experiences, their education, their passions, who their families were. And I only had one thought in my brain. Wow, what extraordinary and brave people these people were. Simply incredible, inspiring. So it was a cold and dark January morning with snow crunching underneath my feet, as it does in northern Alberta in January. And that's when it happened. That moment. Ignition. That's who I wanted to be. So off I went, empowered by a passion and a destination. And boy, did I ever go for it. It was the shuttle era, right? You know, a child of the shuttle era. That summer, the movie Space Camp came out. That continually fueled my desire. And I planned and I strategized. How am I going to get there? I need to make a plan. And I noticed that there were civilian astronauts and military astronauts. And the civilian astronauts in Canada, anyways, they were PhDs, brain surgeons. And the military astronauts were officers with master's degrees. And for a whole host of reasons, one being I'm squeamish about blood, I decided to choose the latter. And plus, it looked like a lot of fun. So off I go when I'm 17, join the military, for that one purpose, that one destination, to become an astronaut. A few years later, I'm flying in the back of an aircraft, a long-range patrol aircraft called the P-3. I'm a navigator on it. And I often reminded my crewmates, I'm only here temporarily. I'm going to get selected in the next astronaut program. And they would indulge me by doing quick level offs, kind of like the top of a parabolic flight. And I would throw up my pencil and watch it hover just for a second before it fell back down. I made sure not to throw anything too pointy. It's okay. That reminds me, I need to change my slide. There we are. There's Charity at Space Camp. Wow. Anyway, so fueled by this desire, in the military, I had a sudden dose of reality. That destination was no longer linear. I couldn't figure out how to get there from here, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, counting ships. But that first experience, I quickly learned many, many things. I quickly learned while flying 12 miles off the coast of Iran that you really need a GPS signal and you have to be very precise. I quickly realized flying in the Arctic, there's no radio communication. It's really difficult. And as soon as we got a satellite radio on board, life was easier for me. I quickly realized that had we had good Earth observation data or remote sensing data, I wouldn't have to spend 8 hours counting ships in the Atlantic Ocean. So these were all lessons that I didn't really accept and understand at the time. And as a series of postings and experiences, one building upon the other, I quickly realized I had passions outside. It grew, this passion for space and satellites. It kept growing, and that beacon of astronaut started to dim. And how can this be? How can your childhood dream slowly disappear while another grows? So I look around here and I see all sorts of folks. I see some folks that have been in the industry for a couple decades. I see astronauts, scientists, engineers, lawyers, policymakers. I see all sorts of occupations. Artists, educators, diplomats, operators. And knowing that every step along the way, I had such a rich and interesting and inspiring experience. And that's all because I had that one goal, that one destination to go for. And amongst the many occupations there are in the satellite industry, there are a lot, you can also be an embassy exhibit curator in the military. I did a lot of random things, and this is one of them, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So coming back to the point that how can you let go of one thing and yet still have a passion for something else that's growing? And it took me a while to realize this, but when I did, it was crystal clear. Space is a vector, not a destination. That initial spark, that initial liftoff, gives us direction and magnitude, setting us off on random paths where we coalesce into an industry unmatched with passion and expertise. It funnels those childhood desires into amazing experiences along the way. And so if I have one small insight or piece of advice, it would be you're not going to know what your destination is. You're highly unlikely to be able to control exactly where you're going to go. But stay on the space vector, because I promise you it will not disappoint. You're going to be inspired every step along the way. Thank you.